A strict teacher accused a quiet 12-year-old boy of cheating on his math test until he solved every problem live, with answers that stunned the entire school board. Keon Reddick didn't say much, and he never had to. He wasn't the kind of kid who needed attention to prove his worth. He let his actions talk for him, and more often than not, they spoke louder than any classroom noise. He was 12, tall for his age, slim-built, always wearing a navy blue hoodie his grandma had stitched his initials into. While others in his 6th grade class at McKinley Middle School in Toledo, Ohio, were still stumbling through long division, Keon was casually sketching out algebraic expressions in the margins of his notebook, for fun. His classmates noticed, even if they didn't always understand him. "Yo, Keon, you finished the quiz already?" one boy whispered during 3rd period. Keon nodded slightly, eyes still on the worksheet in front of him. "How?" Keon just shrugged. "I like numbers," he whispered back. Every teacher he had since 3rd grade quietly acknowledged he was different, but not in a way that ever caused trouble. He was helpful, focused, respectful, the kind of student a teacher usually felt lucky to have. Except Mrs. Judith Penmar. She taught math with clipped sentences, tight schedules, and colder eyes. She'd been at McKinley for nearly 20 years, known for her structure and strictness. To her, gifted wasn't real unless the district labeled it. And in her view, Keon wasn't labeled, just suspiciously advanced. Whenever Keon raised his hand, especially during lessons, she either skipped him or called on someone else. If he offered an answer without being asked, she'd say, "Let's hear from someone else this time." No smile. No nod. No warmth. Still, Keon didn't complain. He stayed after class when classmates asked for help. He explained math in ways they could finally understand, breaking it down with patience that felt beyond his years. One afternoon, Keon stayed behind to help Juliana Rivera, a classmate struggling with fractions. Mrs. Penmar was still at her desk. "Okay," Keon said softly, pointing at her worksheet. "You just flip the second number and multiply." "Like this?" Juliana asked, nervous. "Exactly. You got it." Mrs. Penmar glanced up, then back down at her computer. Expression unreadable. The next day, Keon handed in a homework assignment that involved solving word problems that even some teachers might have had to double-check. He used a shortcut he had picked up from a YouTube video on mental math strategies. He had learned it, practiced it, and now applied it like second nature. Mrs. Penmar marked the paper, paused halfway through, and held it up. "Keon," she said across the room. "Did you do this yourself?" He looked at her, confused. "Yes." She pressed her lips together. "Where did you learn this method?" "I watched a video. Then I tried it a few times at home." She stared at him, and something in her expression shifted. Doubt, discomfort, maybe even annoyance. After class, she didn't say goodbye, didn't say anything, but Keon wasn't focused on her. He went home that night and pulled out his math workbook. Headphones on, scribbling in the margins like always. He wasn't trying to impress anyone. He just loved the way numbers worked, how everything had an answer, how the rules made sense even when people didn't. The other teachers at McKinley, his English teacher, his science teacher, even the janitor, often smiled when he passed in the hallway. He wasn't loud or flashy, but there was something about his calm that left an impression. Still, math was where he belonged, and unfortunately, that meant he was stuck in Mrs. Penmar's classroom. The school year went on. Keon's scores stayed high, but every time a test came back perfect, or close to it, Mrs. Penmar's face stayed blank. No praise, no acknowledgement. And then came the day that changed everything. It was the results of the district-wide advanced math placement exam. A grueling test designed for 8th graders and given to the top 6th graders across Toledo. Keon didn't just do well. He aced it. 100 out of 100. And while most teachers would have been celebrating a rare talent, Mrs. Penmar's reaction was different. She didn't smile. She didn't say, "Well done." She got up, paper in hand, and walked straight out of the room. But what began as subtle tension would soon spiral into something no one saw coming. Mrs. Penmar didn't go to the break room. She didn't stop to make a copy or use the restroom like she usually did after class. She went straight to Principal Leonard Gossett's office, holding Keon's test like it was contraband. Leonard was mid-bite into a peanut butter protein bar when she barged in. He blinked, startled. "Judith?" he asked. "Everything okay?" She closed the door behind her, slowly and firmly, like she wanted no one else to hear. "I need to talk to you about Keon Reddick." He set the bar down. "He okay?" "That's exactly the question." She slid the paper across the desk. "He scored a 100 on the advanced math exam." Leonard raised an eyebrow. "That's incredible. I didn't even know he was being tested for it." "He wasn't supposed to be. He got in as an alternate after one of the other kids dropped out." She folded her arms. "But this score, this is too clean. No hesitation. Every single step accounted for, just like the answer key. Are you saying he cheated?" She didn't answer right away. Her eyes stayed locked on Leonard. "I'm saying it's suspicious. The methods he used aren't even ones we've covered in class. It's like someone coached him." Leonard looked at the paper again, scanning the precise handwriting, the neat layout, the final answers circled. "You know we had a district proctor in the room during the test. He could have memorized it, or had access to the questions beforehand. I just think we need to look into it." Leonard exhaled, leaning back in his chair. "I'll forward it to the district office. But Judith, this is a serious accusation, and Keon's never given us a single reason not to trust him." "I understand that. I just don't believe a child like him could have completed this unaided." There was silence between them for a beat too long. Leonard tilted his head. "A child like him?" She looked away, eyes narrowing. "You know what I mean." Back in the classroom, Keon sat quietly as students filtered out. He waited for Auntie Moira, his legal guardian and late mother's sister, to pick him up from school. She was running behind again. It gave him time to pull out a clean sheet of paper and sketch some math problems of his own creation. Just for fun, just to see if he could solve them. In the parking lot, Moira finally pulled up in her silver Honda Civic, half a bumper sticker peeling off the back. "Sorry, baby," she said as he got in. "Had to stop by the community center and drop off a flyer for the food drive. You good?" "Yeah." She glanced at him as she pulled out. "You don't talk much, huh?" He gave a little smile. "You get that test score back today?" He nodded. 100. She laughed out loud. "See? Told you all that scribbling and humming to yourself wasn't for nothing." Keon smiled wider, the way he always did when Moira praised him. She wasn't like other adults. She believed him even when she didn't understand. The next morning, Mrs. Penmar's attitude was different. She called roll call in a monotone voice, eyes skimming past Keon like he wasn't there. During the lesson, she made a mistake on the board calculating percentages. Keon raised his hand. She ignored it. He waited. Then, after a few moments, lowered it. At lunch, Juliana slid into the seat next to him. "Hey, did you hear what she said?" "What?" "She told Mr. Fielding you cheated." Keon stared at her. "I was walking past the copy room and heard it. She said it's statistically unlikely for a student like you to score that high." I didn't get what that meant. Keon turned his face toward his tray, quiet, but inside, a slow warmth began to build behind his chest. Not the good kind, the angry kind, the kind he didn't quite know what to do with yet. That afternoon, Keon was called into the counselor's office. A woman he'd never met before was seated across from the school's guidance counselor. "Keon," she said kindly, "my name is Dr. Cheryl Maynard, and I work with the district's academic integrity team." He nodded. "We just want to ask you a few questions about the math test you took last week. Is that all right?" He hesitated. "Did I do something wrong?" No. She smiled. "Not necessarily. We just want to understand more about how you approached the test." He looked down at his hands. "I just solved the problems." "And how did you learn the methods you used?" "Sometimes I watch math videos online. I pause them and try the problems myself." Dr. Maynard looked over at the counselor, then back at him. "Do you mind taking a similar test again? Same difficulty level, but just you, me, and a timer." Keon's jaw tightened. "Okay." But before anyone could decide what to believe, the district made a move that would raise the stakes even higher. The room was colder than usual. Not freezing, but enough that Keon noticed and kept his hoodie sleeves tugged down to his wrists. It was Thursday morning when he was told to report to room 3C, a room normally used for teacher meetings. Inside, a large rectangular table stood in the middle, with 2 chairs set up across from each other. A thick packet sat waiting for him. So did Dr. Cheryl Maynard. She greeted him with the same soft tone as before. "Good morning, Keon. You sleep okay?" He nodded, clutching the strap of his backpack. "All right," she said, gesturing for him to sit. "This test will be similar in difficulty to the one you took before. There's no time limit, but I'll be observing and recording how you work through it." She held up a small audio recorder, clicked it on, and placed it gently on the table. "Is that okay?" Keon hesitated but nodded again. "Good. Just do what you always do. Take your time." He opened the packet. The first problem was a geometry proof. He read through it silently, tapping the side of his pencil once, then started writing. A clean setup, labeled diagram, logical steps. No erasing, no second guessing. Dr. Maynard watched closely. Every now and then, she jotted something down in her notepad. Not about the answers, but about how calmly, methodically, Keon worked through each problem. He paused occasionally to think, but never once looked confused. The kind of thinking that didn't come from memorization. It came from understanding. Outside the room, a small group had started to gather. Principal Gossett, the district curriculum supervisor, even Mr. Shapiro, the science teacher who always brought his own coffee mug from home. They stood quietly behind the glass window in the hallway, looking in. None said a word, just watched. Back in class, Mrs. Penmar was unusually tense. She clicked her pen repeatedly as she handed out worksheets, her tone sharper, more clipped than usual. A few students glanced around. The empty seat in the second row, Keon's, seemed louder than the whispers filling the room. "Is he in trouble?" one girl asked quietly. "Why would he be?" Another shot back. "He's the smartest kid in school." Mrs. Penmar didn't respond. She just stared at the board. 2 hours passed. Keon worked through multi-step algebraic equations, abstract word problems, pattern recognition tasks. Dr. Maynard kept watching, more intrigued by the way he explained some answers under his breath. She leaned forward at one point. "Can you talk me through this one?" Keon looked up. "Okay." He pointed to the expression. "This one's just factoring, but the trick is spotting that the coefficient's a square. So I try the square root on both sides first to save time." She blinked. "Did someone teach you that?" He shook his head. "I just noticed it a few times. What about this problem here?" "This series question?" He gave a little half shrug. "I saw something like it in a book at the library. About sequences." She tilted her head. "Do you read math books often?" Keon nodded, then hesitated. "Not the big ones. Just ones with problems to try. I like solving stuff." By the 3rd hour, he had completed the test. Not just completed, it looked cleaner, more organized, more confident than his first one. Dr. Maynard stood and excused herself briefly. In the hallway, she met Principal Gossett and the others. "I've seen hundreds of academic dishonesty cases," she said. "This isn't one of them. He didn't cheat." Mr. Shapiro asked, "Could it still be memorization?" "No," she replied, shaking her head. "He understood the problems. He rephrased them, solved them in different ways, and explained his thinking out loud. That doesn't happen with memorization. That happens with actual comprehension." The district supervisor asked quietly, "So what do we do next?" Dr. Maynard didn't hesitate. "We acknowledge what he is, a gifted thinker, and then we ask ourselves why no one noticed it before." Later that afternoon, Keon walked out of room 3C holding his backpack strap in one hand and a math book Dr. Maynard had handed him in the other. "Thanks for your patience today," she said, walking with him. "You're very special, Keon." He didn't answer, just looked down, but then quietly, "Can I go back to class now?" She smiled. "Yes, you can." But when Keon opened his mouth to explain his answers, something shifted in the room. The next morning, a buzz had started around the school. Not loud, not dramatic, just murmurs in the hallway, side glances in the cafeteria, whispers between teachers by the copy machine. Keon Reddick had stunned the district. Word got out that he'd not only retaken the advanced math test under observation, but that he'd solved the problems out loud, with alternate solutions, and done it in less time than before. That didn't just quiet the accusations, it flipped them on their head. In the teacher's lounge, Mr. Shapiro shook his head slowly. We might be looking at one of those rare minds, like once-in-a-generation kind of smart. Mrs. Penmar sipped her black coffee without looking up from her email. I mean, for a 6th grader? He continued. He worked through that test like it was warm-up math. They said he explained patterns in ways some of the evaluators hadn't even considered. She didn't respond. Another teacher, Ms. Felton, added, You ever seen him in class, Judith? What's he like? Penmar looked up briefly. Quiet. Felton tilted her head. Quiet. But bright? He's bright. But something about how fast he works, it doesn't feel typical. Mr. Shapiro raised an eyebrow. Maybe it's not supposed to. Back in the classroom, Keon sat in his usual seat, solving a challenge problem on the board with chalk in hand. Mrs. Penmar had assigned it as extra credit, something she didn't often do. I want the class to try this tonight, she had said, writing the problem. Let's see who can figure it out by Friday. Keon looked at it for a moment and raised his hand. Penmar hesitated. He slowly stood up. I think I have a way to do it. She stepped aside reluctantly. Go ahead. The room went quiet. A few students exchanged curious glances. Keon worked silently. He drew a simple number line, labeled his steps, and broke the problem into smaller parts. After about 2 minutes, he turned around. I think this is the answer, he said, pointing to the board. Penmar stared at it, her arms crossed. How did you get that? He explained patiently, clearly, one step at a time. When he finished, she stared another moment, then nodded once. Correct. A ripple of surprise moved across the class. That afternoon, Principal Gossett stopped by the room unexpectedly. He stepped in as class was winding down, holding a folder in his hand. Hi, folks, he smiled. Sorry to interrupt. Keon, could I borrow you for a moment? Keon looked at Mrs. Penmar. She gave a tight nod. In the hallway, Gossett leaned in. How you holding up? Keon shrugged. I want to let you know we're inviting a few students to participate in a math enrichment session at the district office next week. They want you to be there. Keon blinked. Why? Because they were impressed. Dr. Maynard even asked if you'd be open to talking to some educators about how you think through math problems. No pressure. Just, she thought it might help them understand how students like you learn best. Keon didn't answer right away. Then quietly, okay. By the end of the week, 2 things were clear. First, Keon's skills weren't up for debate anymore. He had earned that perfect score. Second, Mrs. Penmar's behavior over the last few months started getting attention in a way she hadn't expected. Parents started talking. Some of them had kids who had once raised their hands only to be ignored. Some had daughters who stopped liking math after being shut down in class. A few even remembered similar complaints from years ago, brushed aside as personality conflicts. It was no longer just about one test. It was about a pattern. And people were beginning to talk about it, loudly. But what happened after the test would shake the school's foundation. When Keon's story reached the district office, it didn't stop with admiration. It stirred something deeper. People started asking questions, not about him, but about those who had doubted him so quickly. It started with an email. A parent, Teresa Langdon, had 2 older kids who had passed through McKinley Middle years before Keon. She wrote a message to the superintendent after seeing the local paper's short write-up on Keon's test retake. My daughter was told she wasn't math-minded by Mrs. Penmar in 7th grade, she wrote. She's now on the dean's list in college, studying engineering. I let it go back then, but after reading what happened to Keon, I can't stay silent anymore. That email was forwarded to the school board. Within days, more emails followed. Stories, names, time-stamped report card comments, all centered around the same teacher, Mrs. Judith Penmar. One parent wrote, "My son was regularly told to slow down in math, even when he finished early. She once marked his correct answer wrong because he didn't solve it using her method." Another one added, "My daughter loved math until that year. I remember her coming home crying after being told, 'You're not as advanced as you think.'" The district opened a quiet internal review, not disciplinary yet, just collecting. Back at McKinley, Principal Gossett was walking a tightrope. He was protective of his staff, but even he couldn't ignore the shift in the air. Students started talking more freely. Parents showed up to meetings with notepads and questions. Teachers in the hallway traded glances when Penmar passed by. Still, Penmar acted like nothing had changed. She taught with the same dry tone, assigned homework, took attendance. But she knew eyes were on her, and not just from her students. In the staff room one morning, she found her mailbox filled with printed copies of student feedback surveys. Most were from previous years. A few had handwritten notes in the margins. She always picked the same kids to answer questions. She told me not to try the challenge problem, said it was too advanced. She made me feel like I didn't belong in math. She flipped through them, eyes hard. Her face didn't change, but she placed the stack back in the box without a word. Meanwhile, Keon was starting to feel the shift too. At lunch, kids he barely knew started sitting near him. Not to bother him, but just to be around. A couple of them asked for help on assignments. Others just asked what kind of books he liked reading. One kid, Terrence, leaned over and whispered, "My cousin goes to another school and said you're the kid who beat the high school math test." Keon blinked. "It wasn't the high school one." "Still," Terrence said, "you're like a genius or something, huh?" Keon shook his head, smiling softly. "I just like solving stuff." That week, the school board called in Principal Gossett for a private meeting. The room was quiet. Papers in folders, names typed in spreadsheets. The superintendent, Dr. Leland Price, spoke first. "We've received a number of complaints, some from recent years, others going back more than a decade. It appears Mrs. Penmar's classroom has been a consistent source of concern." Gossett stayed calm. "I can't speak to all of those, but I've never seen outright misconduct." "You've seen the evaluations?" "Yes," Gossett replied, "but those are mostly surface level." Dr. Price nodded. "We want to request a formal observation from an outside instructional specialist." "Understood." They paused. Then one board member leaned forward. "We're not just talking about one student anymore. This is about how many students like Keon might have been pushed aside. How many opportunities were quietly denied without anyone noticing." Gossett's throat tightened. "I understand." The next day, Penmar found an envelope in her mailbox with the district seal on it. Inside, notification of a scheduled observation and pending review. No warning, no personal meeting, just paper. She folded it quietly and slipped it into her desk drawer. But for the first time in years, she didn't look composed. Later that evening, at home, Keon sat at the kitchen table, scribbling in a spiral notebook while Moira cooked dinner. "What you working on now?" she asked over the sound of sizzling onions. "Something for fun," he said. "I was wondering if there's a way to shortcut a cube root using patterns." Moira chuckled. "You're gonna set the kitchen on fire with all that thinking?" Keon smiled. "I don't mind. I like doing it." She paused, watching him. "People are finally seeing what you're made of." He looked up. "Yeah." Then quietly, "Took long enough." But it wasn't just about one teacher anymore. The community wanted answers. By Monday morning, the parking lot outside McKinley Middle was busier than usual. And not because of drop-offs. Parents had started gathering with signs, most handwritten on poster board, taped to wooden rulers and yardsticks. Some held pictures of their children. Others held photocopies of assignments marked unfairly, with "See Me" scribbled in red ink. At the front gate, Teresa Langdon, the mother who had first emailed the superintendent, stood with a firm grip on her son's hand. "This isn't just about Keon," she told a local reporter. "This is about years of quiet harm. It's about kids being told they're less capable just because their minds work differently, or because someone didn't believe in them." Inside, the front office phones rang off the hook. Parents were requesting meetings, interviews, Evaluations. One father demanded to know why his daughter was never considered for the advanced program when she had straight A's in math. Principal Gossett stood behind the counter, trying to answer questions one after another, but his voice stayed measured. "We're reviewing the situation," he repeated. "We're listening." But some parents weren't satisfied with listening anymore. Meanwhile, in the 6th grade hallway, Keon sat quietly in the back of Mrs. Penmar's classroom. She taught the lesson with her usual tone, but her posture had changed. Her eyes kept glancing toward the window, where the protest signs bobbed in the distance. Every time Keon spoke, or even raised his hand, she acknowledged it. That was new. At one point during the lesson, Keon corrected a misstep in the example problem. Penmar paused, corrected the board, and said softly, "Good catch." Some students turned to look at Keon. He didn't react, but his fingers lightly tapped his pencil against the desk, one beat at a time. That afternoon, the superintendent released a public statement to parents and staff. It acknowledged the investigation and promised transparency. It also mentioned the possibility of new oversight in teacher evaluations, particularly in how student talents are identified and supported. The response was posted online. Within hours, comments poured in. "About time. Too many kids get discouraged before they ever get a chance. We stand with Keon." Some pushed back, saying teachers were being unfairly blamed, that Penmar had always followed the rules, but others remembered, and they kept writing. 2 days later, the school held an open forum in the gym. Folded metal chairs lined the floor. A table with district staff sat at the front. Parents filled the rows. Some stood in the back. Principal Gossett took the microphone first. "We're here to listen. We're not here to point fingers, but we are here to reflect and to grow." Then came the public comment period. One by one, parents walked to the mic, some nervous, some angry, some calm but deeply emotional. "I almost pulled my daughter out of this school last year because she came home crying every day from math class." My son stopped raising his hand, not because he didn't know the answer, but because he got tired of being looked at like he didn't belong. "Every child deserves to be believed." Then came Moira Reddick. She walked to the mic, paused, and spoke slowly. "My nephew Keon didn't ask for any of this. He just wanted to do his math, help his classmates, and go home. But he was doubted, questioned, and made to feel small, and he still didn't fight back. He just kept doing the work. That's strength. But not every kid can do that. Some give up. Some stop believing in themselves." The room fell quiet. Later that evening, Mrs. Penmar sat at her desk, staring at the glowing screen of her laptop. An email from the district HR office waited in her inbox. Subject: pending review and temporary leave notification. She didn't open it right away. She didn't have to. She knew what it meant. Her eyes drifted to the side of the classroom, to the posters she had hung years ago. One of them read, "Math is logic, not emotion." But the room felt different now, like the weight of every unchecked bias she had carried was finally visible, written in invisible ink on the walls. But the person who stayed quiet the longest finally stood up to speak. Friday morning at McKinley Middle came with a strange kind of quiet. Not the nervous kind, not the kind that makes people whisper, but a stillness that said something important was about to happen. Keon sat in the front row of the school auditorium, legs crossed, palms flat on his lap. He wore a plain button-down shirt, slightly wrinkled at the sleeves. Moira had tried to iron it the night before, but Keon told her it didn't matter. "I'm just talking," he had said. But it wasn't just talking. The superintendent, Dr. Leland Price, had invited Keon to speak at the end of the district's Equity in Education Forum. Principals, teachers, and board members from across Lucas County were in attendance. So were a few news reporters. No cameras, just notebooks, just ears. When they called his name, Keon stood slowly and walked to the podium. There was a mic, but he didn't adjust it. He didn't fidget. He looked out at a room filled with adults, some of whom had doubted him, some who had defended him, and some who still didn't quite know what to think. Then he spoke. "I don't really like talking in front of people," he began. "I like numbers. I like solving problems. Not just math problems, any problem. A few quiet chuckles. Keon didn't smile, but he felt them. I'm not mad that people didn't believe me. Not really, I'm used to that. But I am tired of feeling like I have to be twice as perfect just to be seen as normal. The room went still again. When I took that test, I didn't cheat. I just solved it, like I always do. And when they asked me to do it again, I did. Not because I needed to prove anything, but because I didn't want the next kid to go through this. He paused and looked down at his shoes. Some kids don't raise their hand anymore. Not because they're lazy, but because someone already decided they weren't worth calling on. I see it. I've seen it since 4th grade. He looked up again. I don't want an apology. I want teachers who believe in kids before they judge them. I want classrooms where quiet kids still get heard. I want every kid who thinks different to be treated like they belong here. He stepped away from the mic. No dramatic exit, just a small nod to the superintendent as he walked back to his seat. The applause didn't come right away, but when it did, it started softly, then louder. And then everyone stood. After the event, Keon was approached by teachers and administrators from 3 different schools. Would you mind if I emailed you some questions? You think we could invite you to talk with our faculty? You're remarkable, young man. Keon said okay to most of them. Not because he wanted the attention, but because he thought maybe, just maybe, it could help. That night, Moira let him stay up past his bedtime. They sat on the couch watching old game shows, sharing a bowl of microwave popcorn. Proud of you, baby, she said, ruffling his hair. I was nervous, he said. Didn't show. Then a pause. You think they'll really change? He asked. Moira leaned back, her expression thoughtful. Some will. Some won't. But you planted something today, and that's more than most people get to do in a whole lifetime. Meanwhile, back at the school board office, Dr. Price held the transcript of Keon's speech in his hands. He had already read it twice. This time, he underlined one sentence in pen. I want classrooms where quiet kids still get heard. He circled it, then picked up his phone. Let's add a new item to next week's agenda, he told his assistant. We need to talk about teacher development, specifically around how we identify and support non-traditional learners. But even after the applause faded, the hardest question remained. What now? The following week, Mrs. Penmar's classroom sat empty. A printed notice on the door read, Class temporarily reassigned to room 2B. No explanations, no names, just a quiet reshuffling of furniture, students, and questions. Word spread quickly. She'd been placed on administrative leave pending the district's final review. Some students asked where she went, others didn't. For Keon, the change felt strange, not satisfying, not exactly sad, just different. He now had Mr. Kelly, a younger substitute teacher with rolled-up sleeves and energy that bounced from wall to wall. He didn't pretend to know everything, and he asked students how they would approach problems. During his first class, he pointed to Keon and said, I heard you've got a head for numbers. Want to help me explain this? Keon had nodded, and did. Outside of math class, things were shifting too. The school launched a new enrichment program called Think Different, aimed at identifying quiet or overlooked talents in students. It wasn't a full-blown gifted track, but it was a start, inviting students who'd shown promise, effort, or curiosity into a space that encouraged more complex thinking. Keon was part of the pilot group, so were Juliana, Terrence, and a handful of others who'd never been flagged before. Each week, they'd meet for an hour in the library and work on logic puzzles, math challenges, even storytelling exercises that required pattern recognition. One day, Juliana leaned over and whispered, It's kinda cool being one of the smart kids now. Keon grinned. You always were. Meanwhile, the school board completed its review of Mrs. Penmar. The final report wasn't made public, but summaries were shared with staff. Years of rigid instruction, numerous patterns of exclusion, especially with students who didn't fit her model of what a strong math student looked like. She quietly resigned 2 weeks later. No farewell speech, no send-off, just an email confirming her departure. Some teachers felt conflicted. Others admitted they'd seen signs for years but didn't know what to do about them. Miss Felton said it best in the staff meeting that followed. We can't keep confusing silence for success. Just because a classroom is orderly doesn't mean it's healthy. Keon never talked much about what happened. He went to school, did his work, helped others when they asked. He still carried that same worn-down mechanical pencil and still pulled up Khan Academy videos in the evenings. Not for homework, just because he liked the way they explained things. But some things had changed. More kids started raising their hands. More teachers started listening. Some of them, for the first time, began asking, "Is there a better way to teach this?" Instead of saying, "That's not the way we do it." One afternoon in the cafeteria, Terrence leaned over his tray and asked Keon, "Do you think everything's really better now?" Keon took a bite of his sandwich before answering. "Not everything," he said, "but better than it was." At home, Moira hung a framed copy of the article from the district newsletter on the living room wall. The one with the headline, "Keon Reddick's Voice Sparks Change at McKinley Middle." "I know you don't care about awards," she said, "but this isn't for you. It's for every kid who'll come after you." Keon smiled, looked up at it, then turned back to his math book. He didn't need to prove anything anymore. Not to teachers, not to classmates, not even to himself. He just wanted to keep learning, and now, finally, no one was standing in his way. So what changed? A flawed teacher stepped down. A broken system got a crack in its armor. Quiet students started getting noticed. Some minds opened. Some hearts softened. The conversation got louder. And what didn't? Keon didn't become a celebrity. He didn't win a medal or go viral. He stayed the same thoughtful, brilliant boy who loved solving things. Still quiet. Still sharp. Still the kid who preferred numbers over noise. Every kid deserves to be seen for who they are, not who someone expects them to be. And sometimes, all it takes is one voice to remind a whole room how much we've been ignoring. If the story moved you, share it with someone who needs to hear it. And if you believe in stories that make a difference, don't forget to subscribe.